welcome everyone. I'm Shiran, the CEO of Cassiopeia, a startup that empowers leaders to improve collaboration, belonging, and mental health by using communication pattern analysis. Our latest solution empowers remote managers with the insights they now need the most to lead teams during these challenging times. And our guest today is Amy Cappellanti-Wolf. She is the former SVP and CHRO for Symantec. In addition to serving on the executive team and managing Symantec's global HR function, she led Symantec's workforce strategy and planning, real estate, and facilities function. During her career, Amy had led a human resources team in high-tech, entertainment, and consumer product industries. She has extensive experience in organizational effectiveness, leadership, and talent development. We're very happy to have you here today, Amy.
Thank you, Sharon. It's my pleasure to be here, especially during these times. I'm excited for our conversation.
That's great. The shift to remote working has created major challenges for team members and their managers. Traditionally, 66% of remote employees experience difficulties with loneliness, work-life balance, collaboration, and staying motivated. Today, more than ever, managers need the right support to overcome these virtual workplace challenges. These new challenges creating opportunities for HR professionals and for companies that have remote solutions to talk about how to bridge these challenges in ways that can support these destructive workplace events. So first, before we'll start, I would like to thank our sponsors, Diversity Officers Magazine and Diversity Executive Leadership Academy. So thank you for supporting this interview. And Amy, so my first question, really looking forward to hear you share your thoughts. How do you think the current crisis affect the role of the HR or people leaders inside companies? Will the HR role and responsibilities be affected in the long term? And if so, what will those changes be?
Great. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. Well, first of all, I think we're not the new normal may be where we are today in relationship to how we really leverage remote work. I don't think we're going to go back to maybe everybody being in the office, which was always a challenge to begin with because people need flexibility in their lives, especially to think about the next generation of workers want to be able to do the work on their own time, work hard, but also have the flexibility to take a break or do something for their families. I think we've always added value, and I'm biased because I'm the head of HR and have worked in HR for a lot of my career, but I think HR has always provided impact and value. But the interesting thing right now is we have taken the forefront leadership role. Many of my peers are running a coronavirus task force and initiatives on what does this mean for the business, for the employees, and also probably influencing what the strategy is for customers and go to market as a result of this. So I think, first of all, I think there's a lot of value that business is seeing in HR. There's a great article in The Economist, if you get a chance to read that talks about the role HR has played in this horrific pandemic. But I think now we've got a front and center role to take that credibility that we've already built and capitalize on that in terms of how do we get leaders to think about the people as being the most important asset for companies. So I think our job now is to take what we've learned and start to apply it more so around how do you leverage technology? How do you leverage connectivity? How do you leverage managers to really kind of pull that employment relationship further in and make it a responsibility of not just HR, but also the business?
That's really great, and I definitely agree. It just these challenges just highlight the approach of people first approach, and the HR get amazing and very center role in that. And remote work. So my second question is that remote work is more than just getting a license to Zoom or Slack. I think we can all agree. And companies are required to build a set of rules, practices, and cultural norms that let people work remotely. How can people leaders help in setting these new norms and practices, in your view?
There's a lot of schools of thought about remote work. So I've worked with some CEOs who are very flexible because they realize the best talent may not always be in your pivotal locations, right? And I have other leaders who say everybody's got to be in the office every day. If they're not in the office, they're watching Netflix or watching their kids. And I have never subscribed to that perspective. But I think now on managers to kind of create the rules of the terms of, okay, if we're going to work remote, let's make certain we can see each other when we're talking. Let's make certain we've got ways by which we're sensitive to people's hours. Interestingly enough, my husband is working through all this with his company, and I'm seeing him in front of the computer from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. because he's got a global job. And so we have to be, I think people are working even harder to create boundaries in terms of, what are meetings really happening? Are you sensitive to the time zones? 2, are you giving people a chance to break and replenish? Because you can't go back to back. And 3, do you really need to have a meeting? Is that the most effective way to solve that problem? Is there other ways by which to solve it versus always coalescing everybody together on the phone and being thoughtful about the timing by which you do that? So I think for managers, you've got to be thoughtful about how you schedule people's times. You also have to make certain that people are, getting what they need to be able to do their jobs every day. And you've got to create some sort of connection. So I think now more than ever with this remote work, you've got to take a step back and begin to think about my operating cadence. When do I have meetings? Who's included in those meetings? How do we make decisions? Because very often when you're in the office, you make decisions in doorways, or in hallways. And you've got to be thoughtful now that we can't have those little stand-up meetings. So how do we think about getting decision flows faster and better without always having to coalesce everybody together?
Yeah, that's really, yeah, and definitely it's very practical advice. Thank you. And I can share with Amy that a few of our customers reach out to us just and ask us for our help to support their remote managers with our solution. So remote work and reduce social connectedness create new challenges for managers. I'm sure Amy, you and other people leaders are talking about it these days. Most managers are not proficient in managing people remotely, which in many cases requires a different set of competencies and embracing new tools. So what are the new challenges you see for remote managers and how people leaders can support them?
Well, there was a statistic I recall that I read about a couple months ago that said like 63% of managers are afraid to talk to their people. that's,
Wow.
that's, yeah, I know. It's like, oh my gosh, really? Like you need to talk to your people so you can make certain that they're working on the right things. So imagine that, and then make it more complex by now having to do it from a remote perspective, right? So for managers, I think one, you have got to get really clear about like, what is your role as a manager? And to me, the role of a manager is to ensure people are properly prioritized and help them if they're stuck, and then to help give them, feedback, both constructive, positive guidance to help them grow in their careers. Because if you feel like you're growing and you're learning, you're going to actually contribute more because you're more engaged and you're willing to give up that discretionary time to help the business succeed. So I think the role of the manager is more about empathy, and it's about driving for results, but in a more, I think, collaborative and correctly, micromanaging people in a remote environment. So you have to kind of be outcome driven to what you're asking people to go do. And then you have to be checking in with them in a way that's supportive and accretive and not suspicious and inspecting. And I think that's going to require a different type of manager. It's a lot more listening, a lot more guiding versus telling and directing. And that's not just new for remote work. That's just sort of where the new generation of management is going, because workers today want to be growing and developing, and they also want a manager that supports them versus one that's inspecting them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's I think that a lot of now thought leaders are also mentioned that this is the direction we see for the new leadership style that people want to have. And I wanted to also, you mentioned researches about managers, and now they're just engaging with their employees. So I would love to also share that research shows that remote work just affect employees' sense of belonging, loneliness, and well-being. There's a lot of research have been gathered around that. So I was wondering, what kind of actions can diversity and inclusion leaders and executives take in order to address these challenges, Amy? And how can we use technology, as you mentioned, and people analytics to address these specific challenges?
That's a fantastic question. I don't know if I've got the right in terms of how you can leverage technology for this, but I'd say first and foremost, belonging doesn't have to be in person in terms of in a physical work environment. Now, even more, work lines and personal lines are super blurred. I mean, at least before you go in the office, do your work, leave, you bring work home with you, you personal life into work. But now you're working from home, and all around you, for many of us who have children, you're dealing with both raising a family and also trying to do your job. And so I think leaders are gonna have to really understand, one, how do I structure the work such that people can have their freedom and flexibility, but two, a better understanding of what that means in the complexities in the work environment. So I think first of all, and I've always been a big proponent of this, so it's not being impacted because of this remote work thing, but this notion of pulsing how people are doing is probably going to have to happen more frequently. Now I think you're going to probably have to do some sort of daily check-in about what's on people's minds and how do you rapidly address if there are gaps on that front. So it's more pulsing, and that's where you can leverage data platforms around what you offer in terms of how people are feeling, the feeling quotient, the engaged quotient. I think too, IT departments are going to have to continue to leverage platforms so people can have opportunities, whether it's a Zoom or it's a WebEx or whatever your technology is, that so people feel connected. And I think it's going to require some investment on leaders' perspective. And two, it's also going to require leaders, again, to think about, how does work get done differently? How do I ensure that the outcomes are the right outcomes, but how to make certain that every voice is being heard so that when you get to a conclusion, it's not just because I was the last person had a video conference with you and therefore I'm going to take your idea, but people feel like they can all contribute to it. So to me, it's just a further extension of where we were heading anyway. It's just getting accelerated because now we have to do it more virtually.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I can add to that in my view, managers will need to use additional virtual data sources to get more accurate picture on their team work culture and inclusion, especially communication analysis, as you mentioned, that all communication transition online these days, and there is amazing opportunity here to use more data sources and get just a wider, more accurate picture of what's going on inside their team, how they collaborate, what's their belonging, so sense of belonging. I can definitely agree that it's just these these new challenges, just accelerated the process that were already up and running. So my next question here, I want to, I think it's really relates to what you mentioned, Amy, before about the new leadership style. And I would mention that recently, Josh Bernstein mentioned that there is a radical shift in management culture, shift toward empathy, compensation, and understanding the leaders that emphasize force ranking, competitive evaluation, pushing people were replaced with listening, empowerment, and growth mindset. He mentioned it as the new CEO is Chief Empathy Officer. And we hear more these days about how companies that hired executive that don't have the people first leadership style that you mentioned, we have a difficult time responding to the crisis. Do you think leaders today, especially following the COVID-19 crisis, need to embrace new skills, different mindset, or just new approaches?
So I love Josh. In fact, I serve on a board with Josh, who's now a board observer for it at Better Works, and he's just such a great thinker, and I couldn't agree with him more. And I think what I'm seeing is, and I just recently read a briefing from, I think it was Spencer Stewart, on what they're hearing from CEOs, and the CEOs that are most successful are the ones that don't run away from this COVID virus, for instance, but are stepping into the challenges. They're empathetic, they're agile, they're humble, they're courageous, they're bold in making decisions, but their leadership style is all about bringing people in right now versus sort of retreating.
Yeah.
And it's easy right now to do some things that are drastic, and some companies may have to, in terms of reacting to this by furloughing or laying off or reducing pay. And those are tough decisions. And many CEOs are grappling with those. But I think the CEOs that are really accelerating are the ones that are trying to find creative solutions, both for their customers and their employees, because this is a temporary thing. I do think it's going to take time for the economy to react, and we may go into a recession. But I think people have to kind of stay the course right now and do things that are prudent for today, but also, keep that relationship for the employee really close. Because you know what? Employees are going to stick with companies that took care of them during these times. And by the way, those employees are going to be customers, perhaps, of your products. And I think the CEOs who get that are the ones that are really thinking through what's that employment relationship and how do I create a place of empathy so my leaders also are acting as servant leaders to their employees. And frankly, as a C-suite executive, we got to build those skills. And it's something that we were talking about 5 years ago at my company, and even before that, around servant leadership and how to really build that capability. And now I think it's no longer, oh, that's an exceptional leader because they do servant leadership. That's becoming like table stakes. That's a requirement and that's an expectation. It's not something that, oh, that's just a unique leader. We all need to possess that. So I think it's a really interesting time. And I think what will be interesting is to reflect after all this is over, which it will be over, hopefully soon, about like who stood out and how can we take those learnings to apply to the next crisis? Because there's always going to be something in this world that's going to have us be disrupted. And how do we act more quickly and agile to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think very accurate perspective. I can't, I couldn't agree more. And I see that we're getting to the end of our interview, and I wanted to ask you just to sum up, really one question. So what kind of opportunities do you think the COVID-19 outbreak creates for companies and leaders these days? Because it's not, all bad. And I feel that there is some really amazing opportunities here on the table, but I would love to hear your point of view.
Well, I mean, I think it's a big question because I think it has lots of, it's hard to think of the positive, but I think there's a lot of positive. One, it's back to this notion of empathy, and that we all have impacts from this. It's not just one person versus another. We all are experiencing, whether it's loved ones who are sick, friends, whether it's the economy, whether it's just our own anxiety about having to work differently, or the unknown and the uncertainty. And tell you, try not to watch the news because there's just so much that, that could really bum you out any given day. Two, I think it's also showing how companies are reacting to this. So I think about healthcare. I think about how we're going to protect ourselves going forward. So if something like this happens again, we are much more prepared for it. I think it's also accelerating innovation in terms of how do you work differently during times like this, whether that's the remote work thing, whether it's your supply chain or your value chain, whether it's having managers have to build new skill sets and capabilities around how to manage remotely or during times of crisis. So, I mean, I never let a good crisis go by. You have to take advantage of it. And I think stronger through this, but it's a lot around mindset. It's around innovation. It's around trust that people are going to do what they need to do to get their jobs done while they also take care of their families. I think it's humility. I think very often we think we know everything and we really don't. So how do we take this as an opportunity to say, gee, how do I listen more? How do I practice empathy? How do I think differently? I know I'm personally weathering the storm more strongly because I've got a strong family around me, and I'm watching my daughters go through this, one of which is a senior in high school, who's not going to have a very typical senior year and graduation. And how do I help them through that? Because that's only going to make them stronger. So I think it builds resiliency, humility, and hopefully, takes us faster to some of these skills we were trying to build in the first place. And we're sort of slow to adopt. Now we have to adopt them to not only survive, but thrive.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm really glad that we would be able to sum up in this, positive also view and I couldn't agree more. So I would like to thank Amy for this wonderful interview and for sharing her experience with us. This is exactly the right conversation I think we need to have these days to find new ways and solutions to support our employees and leaders. I do hope that, as Amy mentioned, more companies and leaders will be able to create new opportunities, and that the current challenges will help companies grow and make them even stronger at the end of the day. So thank you everyone, and thank you, Amy.
Shiran, thank you. Take care. Be well.